Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm creating layers and texture with die cuts using the new La Dolce Vita collection from Spellbinders. We have the La Dolce Vita banners as well as the La Dolce Vita Sentiments press plate set. I love this Citrus Spritz die set and have so much fun creating with it. And then we have the Lemon Fresco 3D embossing folder, perfect for card backgrounds. We have the Ciao spaghetti set here. I'm actually only going to be using the lips from the Ciao spaghetti set, but you can see what else you can create there. And then we have Under the Sun with a unique sun die cut. And then Deckside Dreams. This one is so fun for a card with really neat dimension. And then my favorite one in this whole collection is the Beyond the Door die. And I use that in a few cards today. This is the DIY deck card that I'm using for color inspiration. I didn't just pick 5 colors. I picked a bunch of them from that picture on the DIY deck. So I actually haven't created or put the colors on the side of that one just because I couldn't narrow it down to just 5. Before starting to create my cards, I want to use the BetterPress sentiment set and create some sentiments so that I have them ready to pick out when I'm ready to do some card making. I have my BetterPress system here. I'm using just some Hammermill Cardstock. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. I am doing some heat embossing for my sentiments. So I put the cardstock on the clear plate, use some VersaMark ink on the plate itself, put the clear plate onto the base, and then run it through my Platinum 6 machine in order to press that VersaMark ink onto the Hammermill cardstock. Then I can use some super fine embossing powder in order to heat emboss those sentiments. I always love doing heat emboss with the BetterPress system simply because you get so much detail with those press plates, and I like the added dimension that heat embossing adds to it. I do use super fine embossing powder for it though, because there is so much detail to those BetterPress plates, especially the sentiments. I find that you get a better result with the super fine embossing powder. And I also use the embossing powder tool to rub it on my cardstock before stamping it or pressing it with the VersaMark ink so that that embossing powder only sticks to where that VersaMark ink gets pressed. Use my embossing tool to melt that in place, and then it has a coordinating die with it that's really easy to line up. I do tape that die in place with some Best Ever craft tape in order to make sure that it's not going to shift on me while I'm doing that die cutting, and so easily I can create a bunch of sentiments all at once. Now, you don't necessarily need to heat emboss. I really love the look of it, but you could just use regular ink as well as a bunch of different cardstocks with it. So it's very versatile when you have BetterPress plates. Once that is done and I have those sentiments to the side ready to go, I'm ready to start my first card. So I'm starting off using that Lemon Fresco embossing folder with some Hammermill cardstock, and I'm just going to emboss it using the stacking for 3D embossing with my machine, and that is going to be my card background. I started out with a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of cardstock, and I do want to make sure to do a tiny little bit of ink blending to bring out that pattern. So I have 2 different distress pads here. I have some mustard seed as well as peeled paint, and I'm just doing some really light ink blending. You can see that I have a large Spellbinders brush, so it's a really large one. I'm not too concerned about only making sure that that ink stays on the raised surface. I am definitely getting some of that ink on the background, but I just want a little bit of color in my background in order to tie in with the die cuts that I'm going to put in the front. I'm going to use this folder as well with my next card, but I'm not going to ink it at all. So you don't necessarily have to ink it, but I did like the look of these die cuts against the background that is lightly inked. So I'm using the Citrus Spritz for the die cut embellishments on this card, using that same mustard seed pad to ink blend my die cuts just to give them a little bit of visual dimension. This is a step that you don't necessarily need to do. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. It kind of depends on the mood that I'm in and the look that I'm going for. I have some leaves from this die set die cut out of some peridot as well as rainforest cardstock, and I'm doing a little bit of light ink blending on them with that peeled paint as well, just at the base of the leaf where the stem attaches. I don't do it over the whole thing. I want to see that original cardstock color and just have a little bit towards the base, again, to give it some visual dimension. I have some flowers from this die set. Then I'm going to do a little bit of ink blending in the center of the flower with that mustard seed distress pad and just using a detailed ink blending brush. Obviously, the large blending brushes would be too big to get just the center of that flower. There is a die cut for the centers of these flowers, and I do have that cut and I'm going to add them to the flowers, but I love the look when you use ink blending where it kind of fades into nothing. So with all of my ink blending done, I'm ready to start assembling my die cuts. I'm using some Barely Art glue and a fine line bottle. I want to make sure that I can get as much or as little glue on the different areas that I want. And in order to place some of the small die cuts, I'm using my jewel picker just to pick up those die cuts. That way I can place them exactly where I want them to go. That liquid glue gives me the wiggle room to make sure that I have it placed perfectly. So it's nice to know that you don't necessarily have to place it perfectly right off the bat. You can place it and then wiggle it in place with that liquid glue. For the centers of the flower, just put a dot of the glue on the centers of the flowers. Use that jewel picker in order to pick up those centers and place them in the center of the flower. With all of my pieces ready to go to start assembling, I'm trimming down that embossed piece to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I always like to start with a piece of cardstock that's a little bit bigger than what I want to finish with, because sometimes when you emboss, it distorts the size or the cardstock just a little bit through the embossing process. So I start out with a piece that's bigger and then trim it down right before I am ready to assemble my cards. I have a piece of rainforest cardstock that was trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 to create just a tiny mat around there. And then before I start gluing my die cuts down, I do like to lay them out. Sometimes I'll lay them out on top of my large acrylic block that I use to hold things down while they're drying. And sometimes I just do it like this. I just wanted some of those larger elements just to see if the design I had in my head was going to work the way I thought it would. Often it does. Sometimes it just doesn't look quite right. So it's always nice to see it and see whether it's going to work before you really commit to anything. So I glue down those lemons and then the stems to them as well. And then I start inserting the leaves. Now, the nice thing as well with liquid glue is the fact that it doesn't dry right away. It gives you that wiggle room, but it also means that you can tuck things under other die cuts that have been glued down, but when the glue hasn't quite set yet. So it gives you some wiggle room that way. So I start with gluing down the leaves that are on the lemon that is behind the other one. Now this die set also could be used to create some limes and it would look fantastic as well. I opted to go for the lemons simply because I like the contrast of the yellow and the green, whereas limes, green and green with the leaves, wouldn't have as much contrast. But it's another way that you can use it, and I always like it when you have die sets that can be used in multiple ways. So with my duo of lemons glued down, I can glue down that single one on the top right. And then I'm going to place the different flowers. So I have 2 large flowers die cut and inked and assembled, and 3 small ones. I always like to finish off or have some odd numbers in there. So I start with some of the small ones, put the larger ones behind it. And then we have this one little stem with the buds. You could obviously do more than this. You could also do more flowers or more lemons if you wanted to fill out your card a little bit more, but I didn't want to hide a lot of that embossed background. I love that it coordinates perfectly with those lemons, so I wanted to be able to see that as well as the die cuts. I picked one of the sentiments to go with the card, but because I have white cardstock in the back, even though there's a little bit of ink blending on it, I wanted it to show up a little bit more. So I took that peeled paint and just ink blended over top of that sentiment. And because the sentiment is done with gold embossing powder, it resists that ink and it shows up really, really nicely. To add just a touch of sparkle, I use some stickles right in the center of those flowers, and it's just going to give the light something to catch as you're tilting that card back and forth. For my second card, I'm doing another lemon themed card, but this time I'm using that Beyond the Door die set. The pieces of that die set are intended to create a vine to go over that arched door. But if you just use the arched leaves part of it, you can create a wreath with it. So I use that lemon fresco embossing folder once again for my background. Again, I just left it white this time. I wanted to make sure to be able to see the wreath really, really well. And by leaving it white, I achieved that. You definitely could do some ink blending on it, but it doesn't necessarily need it. So not only does the Beyond the Door die set have florals to go with those vines to go on the arches, they also have lemons and oranges. So I'm using the lemons from that die set to decorate the wreath. And you can see I have a piece of Tuscan cardstock that I'm using for my mat here that is trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 inches. My embossed piece, once again, is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And when you're gluing them down, another nice thing about liquid glue is when you accidentally glue it upside down, you can easily turn it the right way. So my lemons are die cut out of that Tuscan cardstock, and you could see how I die cut right out of the piece that I did the mat with. That mat, we're only seeing the outside of it. So anything that's die cut and then covered on the center, we're not going to see that. No one is ever going to know that anything was die cut out of there. And it's just a way to extend your cardstock a little bit. So some of my lemons here are die cut out of that Tuscan cardstock, and I have some also die cut out of some beeswax cardstock. Obviously, you could do them all out of the same shade of yellow, or you could do limes, like I said before for this. I opted to do 2 different colors because I wanted to have a lot of lemons to choose from. I'm running low on my beeswax cardstock, and the Tuscan worked well for it. And I also really liked the combination of the two. When you die cut these lemons, there are just the single lemons that have a little bit of extra detail to them, but there are some background pieces that are double lemons. So I took those background pieces, put a dot of glue on each one of them, and then I'm just using my jewel picker to pick up the individual lemons and put them on the base of them. And obviously, when you layer these on top of that base, you get some extra dimension to them because they are overlapping each other. So I glued those together, set them aside to dry, and I have lots of extra single lemons so that I can put on my wreath some double ones as well as single ones, just to make it a little bit more interesting. For the wreath pieces themselves, I have some pieces die cut out of that Rainforest cardstock, which is the darker green, and some die cut out of Peridot cardstock. So with these pieces here, they're just a little bit of an arch to them. So what I like to do is I like to die cut 4 of them. And if these were straight pieces, I would be making a square, but because they're curved, we're making a circle out of them. I like to take the end leaf and overlap it over the stem of the other one so that you don't necessarily see the end of the stem. And then when it comes time to gluing the lighter one on top of it, I shift it so that if it was a straight line, they would be more of a diamond shape so that I don't have the pieces matching and you can't really see the repetition of the die cuts themselves. I also chose to do 2 different color greens here, so there's a little bit of natural dimension with the 2 different colors. You could easily do this same thing with all the same colored green and you'd still get layers and dimension with it, but I really like how that goes to the next level when you choose 2 different colors. You don't need to use a whole lot of that liquid glue. I'm just putting a dot on each one of those leaves and it will make contact with the leaves underneath there and glue itself together or attach itself together. So once I have my wreath here, you can see that it obviously is a nice circle. This would be great as well to use at Christmas time to have a holiday wreath. And like I said before, there's oranges in that Beyond the Door die set. You could do those in red to look more like berries. And I think those would be a great way to use, that would be a great way to use that die set for a holiday wreath. I don't do it on this card, but you could even use some red or say gold or silver ribbon and do a bow on the wreath as well. So once I have my double lemons placed around that wreath, and I have 2 double lemons that are the beeswax cardstock, 4 that are the Tuscan cardstock, I fill in the different areas between them with individual ones, making sure to kind of have a combination of the 2 different colors. So I don't have a cluster of one certain color in an area. I try to make it even all the way around. Because I have more of the Tuscan double ones than I do of the beeswax ones, on those 2 sides there, I'm putting 3 of the individual lemons in the different colors, and on the other sides I'm putting 2. Just a personal preference. I wanted them to be altered with the two different colors. Not 100% necessary. It was just what I was feeling at the time. And by using that die pick or the jewel picker, it makes it really easy to place those die cuts, press them into the glue, and make sure that they have good contact with it. Now, often when I'm creating with die cuts, I'll put some stickles or glossy accents to add a little bit of sparkle or to add a little bit of shine. where it's appropriate, obviously. Here you could add some glossy accents on your lemons if you wanted them to be a little bit more glossy or just a little bit more showy. I opted not to do that because there's a lot of textures and a lot of layers just in that wreath alone by layering up those die cuts together as well as adding those lemons to it. I picked one of the BetterPress embossed sentiments and then did a little bit of ink blending with some mustard seed ink just to coordinate it with the lemons as well as the matte around there. You could easily also use the Dolce Vita banners with this card as well. Either one of them will work. So here is the finished card, and with between that embossed background and that wreath and all those die cuts layered together, there's just so much texture to it. For my next card, I'm using that Ciao spaghetti die set. And like I said before, I'm only using the lips from this. I'm using some new treasured cardstock. It comes in 4 more colors right now, and this is the ruby pack. So the treasured cardstock has 5 different metallic finishes to it, 3 sheets of each. So there's a lot to go around. I have 15 different lips die cut here. I did 3 out of each cardstock finish. I thought it worked perfectly, those lips with that cardstock. It just looks like a bunch of different types of lip gloss. And I wanted to create a card that said hugs and kisses. Now I didn't have a sentiment or die set that had that full sentiment or full sentiment in it. So I chose the hugs layered die set from the Vivid Script Sentiments, and then the ampersand is from the Fabulous Birthday die set. And I kind of figured all the lips kind of said kisses. So I don't actually have one that says kisses, and I couldn't find one that I liked that worked for what I had envisioned. So I'm just doing hugs and then I have all the lips in the behind. For the shadow part, which ends up being just the center of the mouth, I have some anchor cardstock that I've die cut that out of. Once again, gluing it together with my liquid glue. And for this card, I'm going to use that same anchor cardstock for a matte around my image piece. You could also use one of the ruby treasured cardstock pieces as well if you wanted it to be or to match the lips. That would work as well. The anchor cardstock works perfectly. It frames it, and it also ties in with the shadows from the sentiments that I've used. So once all of those layers of those lips are glued together, and I only showed a few of them, the rest of them I did off screen because it's really repetitive, I'm ready to assemble my card. So my piece that the lips are going to go on is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. The anchor piece is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, so the same measurements as the last few cards. But I want to make sure to be able to center those lips and have them evenly spaced. So I'm using some center line tape. This comes in a roll in 6-inch strips, and I'm putting it around my card, centering the 3-inch mark so that I can easily judge where those lips should go. And when I'm putting them around the card, I'm actually putting it on all 4 sides. If you were only trying to do something horizontal on there, you could just do the left and the right, but I also want to center some in the middle of the card between the top and the bottom. So I put some at the top and the bottom as well. Now I originally placed it wrong when I put the tape up there, so I will fix it in just a moment. Again, I want to make sure that that 3-inch mark is in the center of my card, and once I had them placed, I realized I had that wrong and I had to adjust it. I had the math in my head wrong, so easy to adjust. This is like almost like a Post-it note stick to it, so it can be used multiple times. Easy to get up off my glass mat. You could easily even put it onto your cardstock as well. I do recommend, though, when you're putting it right directly to cardstock, maybe putting it onto a t-shirt once or twice first, just to take a touch of the stick out. That way you don't have to worry about possibly tearing some paper up if it's just a touch too sticky to it. Always better to be safe than sorry. So with those pieces of tape all the way around my card, and if you have a sticky mat that has measurements on it, you could also use that for it as well. Or you could use a pencil and a ruler if you wanted to add lines to your piece or the cardstock that you're gluing down. You could do that. You would definitely have to make sure you could erase it afterwards. And this way, by using this center line tape, I don't have to worry about erasing it. So I'm placing the lips on before I start gluing them down. I'm trying to make sure that I don't have 2 different finishes right next to each other. And I'm trying to space it evenly all throughout the card. So I started with that center one, and then I'm just working my way around the card, and easy enough to move things and adjust them if I happen to have two different finishes right next to each other. Some of the finishes of this cardstock in a smaller die cut like this is a little bit harder to see. It's a lot easier to see the difference between them when you're looking at all 5 of them, just the full sheets. But when it's a smaller die cut, sometimes it's a little bit harder to see. And typically, when I'm using that treasured cardstock, typically I'm not using all 5 finishes on one card. I thought it just worked well for this with the lips to have the different finishes to it. But typically I'll just use 1, maybe 2, because a little bit of metallic is good, but a lot tends to be a little bit too much. So I glued the first 3 in the center line first, then I'm working on the bottom line. And as I'm doing this, I'm paying attention to where the other ones that I have glued down are, as well as the measurements on the ruler. I'm trying to make sure that they're nice and evenly spaced around the outside so that I don't have them all shifted, say, to the left or to the right or up or down. I'm trying to make it nice and even all the way around. So by starting in that center and then doing the top and the bottom, I can easily then center the second line from the top as well as the second line from the bottom, and trying to make sure that they're evenly spaced between each other as well. Once they are all glued together, I can put my acrylic block on there for a few moments just to make sure that everything dries well before I start to add my sentiment. And because my sentiments are already layered together, ready to go, it's just going to be a matter of gluing that to the front of the card. When gluing that layered sentiment together, the inside part of it was so fine, I just left it in my die cut until I was ready to glue it to the card. And using a pair of reverse tweezers definitely helped, so then I could easily see where the glue was going and as well as where that die cut would be on that shadow. So with the lips on the background, I can add glue to my sentiment and place it on the card. Now, obviously I did my lips first and then decided where I wanted my sentiment to go. If you wanted the sentiment to be a little bit more prominent, you could also eliminate the lip in the middle so that there was just an open space to put the sentiment there so it didn't have any distraction from those lips in the back. But I liked that even grid all the way on that background. To add just a little bit of extra dimension, I'm adding some glossy accents, but I'm not doing it on every one. I'm kind of doing a bit of a checkerboard pattern. So the top row, the left and right had it, the second row, the middle one had it, the third row, left and right. So there's some lips that have just the cardstock, and then some are going to have that glossy accents on there that are going to give it just a little bit of extra shine and dimension. And it just changes the finish of the cardstock just a little bit. So it makes it almost look like there's a few more different finishes than just the 5 original. Now, when you first put the glossy accents down, it's going to be milky, kind of like a whitish look to it. You want to make sure to let it dry until it's completely transparent. And I love the difference between the different lips that have that glossy accent on there and then the ones that don't. It's nice to have not all of them with the glossy accents, not all of them without. It's nice to have a combination of the two. So with that card done, I'm ready to work on the next one. So the next one is going to be using the Deckside Dreams die set. I want to create kind of a sunset in my background. So I have a piece of Hammermill cardstock here. There is a piece of cardstock that I'm going to be using for the water at the bottom. So I just placed that onto this white piece here just to make sure to know exactly where I didn't have to ink. Put the cardstock on my sticky mat, and I'm using a few different distress colors to create that sky. So the first color there was saltwater taffy, then we had shaded lilac. This color here is weathered wood, and then lastly I'm going to do some chipped sapphire just around the outside edge just to kind of frame it just a little bit. So I'm using my large inclement blending brush for this. You could obviously use a smaller one if you want. I really like these for backgrounds because it makes it really easy to create really nice blends to it. And you don't get any harsh lines from the edges of the brush because of how large they are, as well as the fact that they are nice and rounded. So with that sunset or that sky done, I trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5¼ inches, and I'm ready to start assembling my ship. Now I wanted to add some more of that metallic cardstock, so I'm using some from the Ruby pad as well for some of the accents on the ship, as well as the onyx one. The onyx one is black. The 4 different colors that are out are onyx, which is black, ruby, which is the red, There is turquoise as well as antique, and antique is an antique white. So it's a great addition to what we already had, which was the gold, silver, and then rose gold. So all my pieces are die cut, and I have the rest of the ship die cut out of just regular white cardstock, as well as some anchor cardstock for the background piece of, I don't know, my boat parts, the main ship. So these red strips here are done with that ruby cardstock or ruby treasured cardstock pack. It just adds a little bit more shine. I just like the metallic accents to it, but obviously you could just use plain cardstock if you wanted to. There's also the this piece here with the smoke coming out of it. Again, I should really know my boat parts. Glued all of those together, but we're not going to glue the base of the ship to it. The base of the ship is actually made so that you can add natural dimension to your card. So while I have the rest of that done, I'm going to do a few little waves for the bottom part of my card. This is done out of some Cascade cardstock. The darker piece that is also going to be water is a Cosmic Sky cardstock. And then in this die set, there is a little wave that I'm using for that water. Now, with that die set, the blade part of the die is actually to the edge of one side of that. So if you use that die set with the blade towards the edge, you're going to get a little bit of a pressed edge to it. If you want to eliminate that, just turn the die around and you don't have the rest of the die to get that pressed edge. It's one of those things that makes sense when you see it in person. I don't necessarily mind having that pressed edge, so I actually have one that has that edge that's going to be in the middle and two that don't have that edge that are going to be on either side of it. A little bit of a combination of both. For the mat for this card, I just used some black cardstock trimmed to forward an 8x5 and 3/8 inch, gluing that to my A2 card base, and then gluing my little sunset piece here. The waves themselves, I'm going to leave to add to the last moment because we want to put that ship on the front there and give it some time to dry. Because it's done out of that metallic cardstock, it's going to take a little bit of extra time to dry because those specialty cardstocks have a bit of a coating to them, so they don't dry quite as fast as regular cardstock does. So I glued the darker piece of water on my base there, then I glued the top part of the ship down, and here is how the base of that ship works. There's two different flaps on either side. You fold them in and only put the glue on those two pieces there, and then you can pick and choose how much dimension you want it to have. So you can have it have a lot of dimension or just a little bit. And because I don't like to sit and wait for things to dry, I just use my acrylic blocks to hold those down while I'm assembling my waves. I did a tiny little bit of ink blending on those waves with some chipped sapphire ink just to give them a tiny little bit of dimension to them, visual dimension. And then I'm gluing all three of those together. I will be using some foam pop dots to add some dimension to the outsides of them, plus a little bit on the bottom, just to give a little bit of room for the dimension from the base of the ship. We want to make sure that it has room for that dimension that's on there. So once I have those glue dots in place, I check to see if the base of my boat is ready yet. Not quite glued down quite yet. So I let that dry for a little bit longer, and then I can add those waves to the bottom. And because I always like adding a little bit of extra sparkle and a little bit of extra texture, I'm just using those stickles on the top of the waves, and then I will let those dry. They're not going to add any color to it. They're just going to add just a little bit of sparkle to it. Before letting that dry though, it needs a sentiment to it. So I picked one of the pressed sentiments. Again, you could easily choose one of the Dolce Vita banners. Those would work here as well. But I really love the look of those pressed sentiments, as well as the fact that there's a whole bunch of different ones. So here's the final card, and you can see how that bottom of the boat has that extra dimension. I didn't put anything in it originally, but if you want to add a little bit of support to it, you can use a couple foam pop dots on top of each other just to support it if you were going to mail this card. Now, obviously, if you were going to mail this card, you would definitely want to use a bubble envelope or something that would not press the boat part down. Really, I'd probably hand give it to someone. For my next card, I'm using the Under the Sun, and I want to add a little bit of movement to this card. Before I do that, I'm going to glue my sun together. So I have some of that Treasured Gold cardstock pack, and I have it in the glitter finish for the background of my sun. The face of the sun and this piece that I'm adding glue to is actually done with the antique white treasured pack. This one is the pearl finish, and it has kind of a cream look to it, but when you tilt it in the light, the shine is almost a little bit gold. So I thought it worked perfectly to go with the different cardstocks I have here for the sun. Now, again, like I said before, because we're using specialty cardstocks that have a bit of a coating on them, they do take a little bit longer to dry. So I do wait just a little bit longer. For the background to the details of the sun, there's this little T piece here that I have die cut out of some Raven cardstock. And once that is filled in, we can add some of the details to the face of the sun. Before I do that, I'm going to glue that onto the sun rays so that can be drying at the same time as I'm adding the details to the face. I want to make sure that it is nice and centered, and again, using that acrylic block just to hold everything in place. So there are a couple cheeks to the sun here, as well as the whites of the eye. And because the white of the eye is just a different finish, as well as a different color from that antique white pearl cardstock, you definitely can see the whites when you're looking in person. A little bit harder to see when you're looking at a video. So I glued those cheeks down, let that dry for a few moments, and then there are two little pieces for the lips. I definitely recommend a jewel picker to put those in place because they are really, really tiny little slivers. So with that done, I'm ready to start the base of my card. I wanted this card to have a little bit of a different movement to it. I didn't want it to be just a plain A2 card that just folded. So I have a piece of Cascade cardstock trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. I'm gluing that to my A2 card base, and I'm going to let that dry for just a few moments. And then I'm picking a circle die from the Everlasting Circles die set. I want one that's just a little bit bigger than my sun. I like the fact that this has so many different sizes to choose from so that you can pick and choose the right size for what you're doing. So I'm going to cut a circle right into the front of my card here. I have the die that's going to work for what I'm doing. I'm using some Best Ever Craft tape just to hold that die in place. So when I'm die cutting it, it's not going to shift on me and move on me. And I only need to die cut or have put the front part of the card through my die cutting machine. So once the pressure part of my machine goes over the other part or the end of my circle die, I can move in the opposite direction and take it right out of the die cutting machine. Now there's two ways that you could do this card. You could just do this hole in the front of the card and then glue the sun on the inside, so it's just kind of a window in the card. But again, I wanted it to have a little bit of movement to it. So I have a piece of scrap cardstock here that's probably about 1.5 inches wide and 6 inches long. I scored it at the 1 inch mark, the 3 inch mark, and the 4 inch mark. And then when you fold those scores together, you create a rectangle. I'm using some glue on the back 2 inch mark and gluing that to the inside of my card, kind of in the center part of the circle. It's just a little bit farther down than the center, but kind of there. Then I'm adding a little bit of glue just to the front part of the card that will attach to that rectangle. And you can see that we've created a platform for that sun to sit on. So now I'm going to put some glue just in the 2 inch rectangle part of that little rectangle piece for the inside. I don't want to go outside of those score marks though. I want to make sure that the glue stays within that, because otherwise our card isn't going to open quite properly. So then I glued one of the La Dolce Vita banners to the front, and it was die cut out of that antique white pearl cardstock, so the same cardstock that was done for the sun. And then I have a couple of embossed press sentiments that are going to go on the inside. And you can see when we open our card, we still see that sun, and the sentiments themselves work well with the sun. I think it says something about it's your day to shine, happy birthday, and the front of the card says hello sunshine. So it works really well with that sun, as well as I love the fact that there are extra press sentiments that work well inside. To add just a touch more sparkle, as if there wasn't enough with the glitter cardstock as well as the pearl cardstock, I added some stickles to the cheeks as well as the lips and just let those dry for just a little bit. And here we have a card that has that element on the front, but it moves with the card opening, and you can see it on the inside. For my last two cards, I'm going to be using that Beyond the Door die set. Like I said at the beginning, this one is my favorite from the whole thing. So I needed to do at least two cards with that Beyond the Door die set as is. And then obviously I did that first one with changing it up and using it as a wreath. For this particular one, I want to have a shaped card base. So I have the Essential Arches die set. I'm using the largest size for the base of the card. I cut that twice and used my score pal to score close to the top of the arch and then glued that to the back of the first one to create the card base. I also took some Cascade cardstock that I die cut with a little bit smaller size of the arch so that I had a blue background for the rest of the arch pieces to go on. I have all my pieces die cut and I have them stored in my craft stacks. I do this often. I love prepping for everything, having all the die cuts in one place, and that way I know I'm not going to lose them or misplace them. Once I have the outer part of the arches down, and I do use the steps from this die set to judge where that arch should be placed. I wanted those steps to be put towards the bottom of the card. So by putting that down first and then figuring out exactly where the arch gets placed, I know that when I get to the point of adding those steps later on, I'm going to have enough room for them. To add just a little bit of a sunset sky to the background here, I have some Cascade cardstock, and I'm just using those same colors that I was using on the ship card. So I have some saltwater taffy, some shaded lilac, and then weathered wood. I didn't bother with, not chip sapphire, not weathered wood. I didn't bother with weathered wood because it was pretty much the same, a similar color to the Cascade cardstock. With that ink blended, I can put that on the inside of the arch, and then I can work on the rest of the scene. So there's a little cobblestone path that goes in there. There is some piece of water that goes in there. There's also some clouds that can go in there. Now, obviously, you can pick and choose what pieces you want to go in there. You don't need to put everything in there, and you also can just eliminate all of that if you wanted to. You could just have the sky piece. You could also use some stamps to put a little bit more of a scene on the inside. For my second card with this die set, I'm going to be using something else to create the scene on the inside of the arch. So I decided for this one to use all of the pieces for the inside there, but like I said, you can pick and choose what pieces you want to be in there and what you don't want to be in there. With that scene done, I'm ready to add the steps to the bottom, and the steps come in two pieces. There is the base of them, and then there's another die set for the tops of the steps. You could die cut those of the same color. I chose two different shades of cardstock so that it's a little bit more visible that it's steps. So I chose some anchor cardstock for the base of them, and then just some white cardstock for the top of the steps. There's also a little lantern here that hangs in the arch if you want it to. Again, you can eliminate anything you want. There's so many different options in this set that there's a lot of different ways that it can be used. So I used some of that Tuscan cardstock for the inside of the lantern, and I used some silver treasured cardstock in the matte finish for the outside of the lantern so it looked like it was silver. And then we have a couple shuttered doors here that have little pieces or little details that go inside. So the base of those doors I cut out of Cascade cardstock. The inside pieces were die cut out of the Cosmic Sky. So it blends perfectly with the background of the card as well as some of the details on the inside of the card. And I love the fact with layering dies from Spellbinders that it actually puts an indent or like a mark to show you exactly where those layers go. So there's very little guesswork to it. So it's nice to know exactly where everything is supposed to go. You can obviously change it up a little bit if you want it to, but you don't have to figure it out. It's very intuitive where those pieces go. So with the inside parts glued onto my shutters, I can glue them on the inside of my little archway here. Because I don't have an opening in the archway, I'm putting glue on the whole piece. This is going to make more sense when I come to my next card, because the next card is going to have an opening in it. So for that one, I'll be gluing those shutters down just a little bit differently. And then with that base of the arch and the inside pieces done, I'm ready to add the greenery. So while waiting for a couple of those pieces to dry, I added some greenery to the pots that I'm going to have on the side so that they have a few moments to dry. Now I'm adding the greenery to the arch itself, and those are die cut out of some peridot cardstock. And then I have some flowers die cut out of mulberry cardstock. So they're a beautiful purple color. I also have flowers for my pots. Those are die cut out of some Bellini as well as Sicily cardstock. So you could easily, if you wanted, coordinate the flowers in your arch with the flowers in your pot. I opted not to because I thought it would give it a little bit more interest in color and detail, having those a little bit different colors. And obviously they're colors that work with each other. They're not opposite colors that compete with each other. So the Bellini as well as the Sicily flowers, I'm layering them on top of each other with the darker ones behind and the lighter ones in front. They are fairly similar in color, just different shades of the same color tone, so they work well together. So with all those base pieces ready to go or die cut and glued together, I can add my sentiment and just put it in the middle of that arch and then let that dry for a few moments. And once again, because I like to add just a tiny little bit of extra sparkle, I'm adding just a dot of stickles to the center of the flowers. You could also use a gel pen for this. You could use like the jewel stickers that you can get from Spellbinders. Those would be really pretty in the center of the flowers as well. Just a little bit quicker to do the stickles and let those dry than using up a bunch of the gems. So I love the fact that that arch worked really well with the essential arches, and it created a really nice card with a lot of area on the inside to write. I also wanted to use this same die set with a shadow box card. So I have 2 pieces of cardstock here trimmed to 5.5 inches by 6.25 inches. On that 6.25 inch side, I scored at 1/2 inch and 1 inch from each side, and then use my bone folder to press those score marks in. I'm doing that to both the front and the back of the card. Once you have these scored and folded in, the finished dimensions of the card is 4.25 by 5.5 inches. But because of the way this card works, as soon as you pull it out of an envelope, it'll go nice and flat for an envelope, but as soon as you pull it out of an envelope, it will kind of pop up and create a shadow box card. So before assembling the front to the back of the card, we have a few things to do first. So I have the Uncharted Waters layering stencil set. I'm going to stencil the inside of the card with a little bit of a tropical scene, and you're going to be able to see it from the doorway that I'm going to create in the front of the card. I have my sticky mat here to hold the base of the cardstock, and then I also have some painter's tape that I'm going to use just to kind of create some registration marks so that when I'm doing the different layers, I know exactly where to place that stencil. I typically will do this at the top left corner, bottom right corner, but because the bottom right corner is kind of affected by my cardstock, because my cardstock's a little bit wider than that stencil, I'm just going to put a few pieces towards the bottom, just showing where that bottom would be, and it will be just fine. This is one of those stencil sets that once you have the first one in place, the other ones are pretty easy to see exactly where they're going to go. There's 6 different layers here. You can use as many or as few as you want. I wanted to create again, a sunset scene. I just think they look a little bit more interesting with cards, but obviously you can simplify it and not do the whole sunset. And I want to make sure that my stenciled image is on that whole back of the card. It doesn't matter if any of this ink goes on the scored bits, because they're going to be on the inside of the card. We're not going to really see that, so you don't have to worry about that as much. So the water itself, I ink blended with the weathered wood distress ink. The rocks here, I'm using some Hickory Smoke distress ink. And for that first layer, I did a fairly light coat of it. The rocks themselves have a couple different layers, so by doing a lighter coat on the base layer, I can do it a little bit heavier for the other layers, and we'll get the whole scene, and I don't need to use a bunch of different grays. For the sky themselves, I'm using the same colors that I've been using for the skies for the other ones. So the first color was Saltwater Taffy. The next color is Shaded Lilac. Then we have Weathered Wood. And then I will go in with that Chipped Sapphire just to kind of frame it in and get some darker areas towards the top. And again, I'm using those large ink blending brushes because they create a nice soft blend between the different colors. So as I'm working my way through my different layers here, I am taping my stencil down. Typically, if your cardstock is smaller than your stencil, that sticky mat will hold the stencil in place. But because my cardstock's a little bit wider, there's not enough sticky mat to make contact with the stencil. So taping it in place can make sure that I don't accidentally have that stencil shift on me. For the greenery, for the bushes in the background here, I'm using that peeled paint, and I'm making sure to do it a little bit heavier towards the bottom, a little bit lighter towards the top, so it has a natural highlight to it. Just makes it look a little bit more interesting. For the next layer of the bushes, I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm also trying to make sure for this layer, there is the rocks as well as the greenery. So I'm trying to make sure when I'm doing that ink blending to not contaminate my colors. However, in this use, if I got a little bit of green on those rocks, I could say there is just algae. That would work. For the last layer here, we have some birds in the sky that I'm going to do with that hickory smoke. And then when it comes to the reflection in the water, I'm going to use those same colors that I used in the sky. The only one that I'm eliminating is I'm not doing the weathered wood because I already used it for the base part of the water. So I'm going to start with that saltwater taffy. Then I'm going to go do a little bit of that shaded lilac. And then I'm going to go back in with the chipped sapphire. So it's a little bit darker than the weathered wood. Another option that you could do for this, where you could use a shimmer spray over the water to add just a little bit of extra shimmer to it, or you could use some Stickles glitter gel in part of it, or just Stickles over it if you wanted just to add a little bit of sparkle to the surface of the water. Because this scene is more on the inside of my card rather than the focus of my card, I opted to just keep it very simple and just have it as distress ink. With the inside of my card, I want to add just a little bit of ink blending to the front of my card. If you wanted it completely even in color, you could use some colored cardstock here. I wanted to have a little bit of color variation. I think it just looks a little bit more visually interesting to have some areas that are lighter, some that are a little bit darker. I'm focusing more around the outsides of the card because I'm going to use the inside part of the doorway to cut an opening or a frame in the center of this. So the middle part's going to be cut out anyway, so I don't need to worry about the ink blending there. I also made sure to fold in the flap, so I'm only inking the front of the card. I also made sure to completely clean off my sticky mat in between so that I wasn't getting any ink on the backside of those flaps. Always better to clean off that mat and be safe than sorry. Once I've positioned the doorway, I tape that in place and then die cut it. And once again, same as the last card, I used the stairs to determine where that doorway was. I want my stairs to be towards the bottom of the card. So I place those on there and then figure out exactly where that doorway was going to be before taping it in place. And now that the front and the back of our card are ready to go, I can tape those two together. So those flaps on the side are 1/2 inch wide. I have some 1/4 inch score tape here, so I do 2 strips of each one. This tape really sticks well, so I want to make sure that I have perfect placement of each side, so I do them one at a time. Once these pieces have stuck to the cardstock, the only way to get them apart is ripping, so better to be safe than sorry and make sure that everything has perfect placement, rather than trying to be fast and getting both sides glued at the same time. Much better to do them one at a time. I realized as I glued them together that my back side was just a tiny little bit taller than the front. So I used my trimmer just to trim that down to make sure that they were both the correct size. And then I tested it just to make sure that it would fold down nice and flat, pop up. I always test things while I'm working on them just to make sure things are going as I want them to go. Better to do that than to get to the end of your project and then realize that something went wrong somewhere and you just didn't realize it. So with the card base put together now, we're ready to start assembling things to the front of the card. So same as my last one, I'm going to work with the doorway first. I'm kind of working in the same order. So I do the frame of the doorway, I do the shutters, add the lantern. The lantern here I want to put between there's 2 different frames for the doorway, one outer frame and one inner frame. I want to put it between the 2 of them so it kind of hangs in that opening. So I glued those pieces together, and then I'm picking out the other pieces for my shutters as well as my steps so that they're ready to go. So I can glue the different pieces down. The color scheme that I chose for this card is more of like a destination wedding or a tropical wedding. So I have a lot of whites and grays here, and then I just have some color in the scene within the doorway, and then coordinating colors in my florals as well as my greenery. So the scene on the inside, I was paying attention to the colors that I was putting there so that everything would coordinate together beautifully. As I'm gluing pieces together, once again, I'm putting them under my acrylic block just to hold them in place. I never like sitting and holding and waiting for glue to dry. I'm just not patient enough for that. So by having that block there, I can make sure that everything dries properly. And because it's a clear block, I can also see if something happened to shift as I was putting it under there. I can see that everything has perfect placement or the proper placement. and I don't have to worry that something has moved and is drying improperly. So with all of these pieces together, I can start to assemble the card. Now, my last card, I glued those shutters down fully because I had cardstock underneath it. I didn't have an opening, but here I have an opening. So when I glue those shutters down, I'm only going to put glue on the outer edges of them, just the part that is going to be on my inner doorway. I don't want to accidentally glue those shutters to the seam on the back of the card. I want to make sure that my card still functions properly. So definitely be really careful if you're going to do a card like this. Make sure that you only glue the shutters to the door frame and not accidentally to the background of the card. I like to glue those steps first before gluing those shutters. It just gives a bit better idea of where the placement for them makes sense, because you obviously wouldn't have those shutters below where those steps are. So once again, put those in place and then do the shutters. And again, only putting the glue on the outer edge, the edge that's going to be sticking to the door on the front of the card. I'm also using that acrylic block just to hold those in place. Because there's just a thin strip of glue there, it really wanted to curl up on me. So you want to make sure that it has good contact and glues properly as you're doing it. For the greenery for the pots, I have them die cut out of fern cardstock as well as rainforest cardstock. So these are darker greens than some of the greens that I've been using throughout the video. I wanted them to coordinate with the green that I have on the background or on the scene part. And I'm using the same greens for my arch as well. The flowers for these were just cut out of alabaster cardstock, so a nice cream colored cardstock. You could easily substitute these for a color if you wanted them. I only wanted the colored flowers for my little archway, so I wanted something fairly simple, but something that would work well for kind of a wedding-ish theme for those pots there. So I have two different pieces of greenery for the arch. I did them out of the same two colors that I did for my pot. So those were done out of fern as well as rainforest cardstock. Anytime I do two-tone greenery, I do like to do the darker color behind the lighter color. It just adds some nice shadow to it and it gives a really nice layer to it. And I also like to offset them and turn them just a tiny little bit, just so that you don't see a repetitive pattern. For the florals, they are not symmetrical, so you could easily just turn one around. You can't do that as well with leaves because the leaves kind of are directional and you could see if there was some leaves that were upside down. So by just turning them a little bit and having them offset, that just kind of fixes it. Some of that is hidden because of the flowers that we're putting on here, but I do, again, like to make sure that they're not totally repetitive. I die cut the florals twice for this, similar to what I did with the pots for my last card. So these are done with the same colors as those pots. This is with Bellini and Sicily. Sicily was glued down first, simply because it's the darker one, and then I'm gluing down the Bellini, and I want to make sure to be able to see both colors. So just like my leaves, I do kind of turn them a little bit, have them offset a little bit, just to make sure that I don't have repetitive patterns here. With those done, I can glue my pots at the bottom of my card, and then our card is pretty much ready to go. The pots are pretty much the last thing to go. There's a few other things in this set that I haven't used. There's like a rock path, so you could put rocks towards the bottom of the card as well. I opted not to put them on the cards that I was creating. I did choose a pressed sentiment, but once again, same with the shutters. I only put glue on the outside edges that were going to stick to the door frames. I didn't want to have any glue that might possibly glue the front of my card to the back of the card through the sentiment. So I always like a little bit of a sparkle in the middle of my flowers. So I just added a dot of the stickles to the centers of those flowers, little tiny bit on the water that's visible. At first I wasn't going to add it, and then I decided that I thought it might look nice to have just a touch of sparkle in there. I let that dry completely, and now our card is done and ready to go. So we can fold it properly, pressing those flaps on the inside, and just like before, it folds nice and flat. The finished size is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, so it'll fit inside an A2 envelope, and there's a little bit of dimension on the sides where those flaps fold, but it's nice to create a card that is dimensional and has textures and layers from the die cut, but can fit into an A2 card. And because it's just cardstock, it's nothing metal, nothing heavy that's going to have a problem with mailing. Then we have our next card, which is the shaped card, the one done with the arched background. I always love shaped cards because they're just a little bit different from something that you can buy in the store. It's one of those things that you're not always expecting. So it's just a nice difference from regular A2 cards. And the base of them is really, really easy to create as well. So it's not something that takes a long time to create. Then we have our sun that opens up with the circle and opens up and is visible on the inside of the card. I love the different textures from those treasured cardstocks, from the metallic cardstocks in there. It gives a lot of sparkle and a lot of dimension and interest to that card. Then we have our little ship here, and I love it with the sunset in the background. It coordinates beautifully with all of the different colors, and even the saltwater taffy on the background works well with the ruby colored cardstock that was done with the accents for that ship. Then we have our Hugs and Kisses card done with all of that ruby cardstock with the different finishes to it. Something completely different from the rest of the cards in this video, but I just thought it was a fun and different way to use that Ciao spaghetti die set. Then we have our lemon wreath with all of those layers made from the Beyond the Door die set, a different way to use that die set. And then the first card with those lemons and that lemon embossed background. And once again, you can easily do limes with that, and I love that you can do extra things with that. It just gives die sets a lot more value when you can do multiple things with them. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. Have a fantastic day.